open to the public and recording, correct, Dallas? Streaming live on YouTube. All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to yet one more budget meeting. I appreciate everyone joining us here tonight. We'll begin with an approval of the agenda as it has been published. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I have a motion from Commissioner Martin.
Second.
Second from Commissioner Coleman. Any questions or comments on the agenda that was published? No? Dallas, if you would put up the telephone number for us. And ladies and gentlemen, we are at the beginning of tonight's workshop. We have a motion properly seconded on the floor to adopt the agenda as it was published. If you think that something else was supposed to be on the agenda tonight, or you have a question about the agenda, that's the only motion on the floor right now. All you need to do is call the number on your screen. Once we have you in the meeting, you'll see a little hand signal at the bottom of your screen. Simply click that hand symbol. That'll let us know that you would like to make a comment about the agenda, and we'll make sure you have the opportunity to address the commission. If this is the first time you've tuned in with us on a Zoom meeting, we have about a 30-second delay between our live feed and what the folks watching on YouTube are seeing. So we do always try to make sure we kill just enough time to make sure everybody has a chance to call in. Dallas, has anyone raised their hand?
No, sir.
Okay, we'll go back for a roll call vote. Commissioner Coleman?
Aye.
Commissioner Farnsworth?
Ooh.
Was that a no?
Aye.
Aye. Commissioner Martin?
Aye.
Commissioner Norfleet?
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. We have one item on the agenda tonight, and the manager is going to talk to us tonight about capital improvements. This is the one that we separated out because we thought we'd have a long night if we put two of them together. So we've got some exciting things, some future visionary concepts to discuss tonight. And so I appreciate everybody being willing to do this as a separate workshop so that we can really focus on these ideas. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the manager to take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you indicated, this is the third of 5 workshops planned for the fiscal year 2021 budget season. This one is related to capital improvements. As you indicated, that it was a great idea to split it out. This is content-laden workshop tonight. We got a lot of information to share with you. I'd like to point out for the benefit of the commission and the public that we are focusing exclusively on general fund projects tonight. We have, as we go through projects, you'll see we spend quite a bit of time and provide quite a bit of detail on these projects. We have as many or more in the utility sector. All things probably the commission's aware of, but we haven't taken a deep dive in. We plan to share that information in a workshop setting sometime with the commission in the next 90 days or so. Not to worry if you don't see your favorite utility project coming up tonight. We are going to start, we kind of got 2 thrusts with this workshop. We are going to start by discussing all of the financing alternatives for large capital projects, things we wouldn't pay for with cash or pay as we go. There are considerable alternatives out there. Dallas is going to share that, and then we'll get more into specific projects and how we, the projects we might use some of these financing alternatives that he has shared with us. The projects that we are going to share were directed by the City Commission. The commission asked us to look at street improvements projects, particularly paving unpaved streets, or paving or chip sealing. We also are going to discuss the improving Seaboard Drive as an economic development initiative. And we are going to discuss funding for two public facilities that the commission has discussed with us: the City Hall Complex project, which we last discussed a little bit earlier this year, and police station, and primarily not so much the physical building, but whether the commission wants to proceed with acquisition of land for a future police department. There are a number of handouts that we provided the commission, including the presentation. So you've got the presentation as a handout if you're at home. The next handout is a series of worksheets that are related to roads and unpaved road inventories. There's a handout that is titled Seaboard Drive Redevelopment Plan Concept 1. And the last packet of information are really just some presentations that the commission has seen before. One is the law enforcement workshop. That is followed by some research that Brian put together about available properties in town, pros and cons, anticipated costs, etc. And then finally, the Newberry Facilities Master Plan. That was a workshop, again, as I'd mentioned, we had in February of this year. So those are primarily backup. We have a presentation, and we'll only use these if, one, for backup information for the commission, but two, if there are questions that dive into more detail, we'll utilize these worksheets to help us get there. Like to advise the commission, as always in a workshop format, feel free to interrupt if you have a question on the fly. And as we go through the presentation, we'll periodically pause and let the public have a time for comments if they'd like. So with that, we are going to push off into the first slide, which is simply that our request of the commission tonight is feedback and direction. Given the volume of information that's being presented, I think we're leaning more on the feedback side than the direction side. I think that the commission, rather than say, do this, are going to say, we want to learn more about this, like this particular financing alternative, more detail on these projects, and we'll make a final decision at some point in the future. Moving into the methods of financing, Dallas is going to take us through the really mentally invigorating part of the presentation, which are all the different ways that we could finance some of these projects.
Thank you for that great introduction, Mr. Manager. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Commissioners. As the manager mentioned, I'm going to go through the various different ways that the commission, methods the commission has available to it to fund some of these capital projects, and then the manager will go through the capital projects that are proposed. Generally, in your methods of financing, you've got three main methods. That's using your current revenues, which we refer to as pay-as-you-go. The commission has a variety of different revenues available to it that it can use for capital projects such as impact fees, fuel taxes, surtaxes, your millage rate, obviously, and then special assessments. And we'll go into more detail on those in a little bit. Obviously, the big one you have before you is debt. You have long-term debt or bonds. You have short-term debt options. One of the things to consider when talking about debt is you never want to issue debt that's for a longer term than the asset's worth. So you don't want to build an asset for your utility infrastructure that only lasts 20 years and then you're paying debt on it for 30 years. So it's definitely something to consider when thinking about long-term debt. And then the last option is grants. Obviously, grants are always good if you can get them, get funds provided by another entity. Some of the drawbacks on grants, obviously, are that they're not always available to you. And then sometimes they are pretty administratively burdensome. Moving into pay-as-you-go. Pay-as-you-go is using your current revenues to pay for projects, banking them up in your reserves, and then paying for your projects in cash. Advantages of pay-as-you-go obviously include that you're not paying interest on debt. There's no closing costs or financing costs for pay-as-you-go. Generally, it's suited for smaller projects where it doesn't make economical sense to issue a bond and pay those financing costs. Pay-as-you-go does lend you some financial flexibility in that you can bank the money for as long as you want. And if the commission changes its mind or wants to do something else with the money, you have that flexibility to do so. Obviously, your credit quality is enhanced and your borrowing capacity is protected because you're not issuing debt. Some of the disadvantages for pay-as-you-go is the concept of intergenerational equity, which is the concept that if the commission decided, for example, to build a $5 million park and it banked $500,000 a year for 10 years, you might have taxpayers who live here for those 10 years, move out in year 10, and then never see the benefit of the taxes that they paid for those 10 years. On the other side of that, you might have people who move in year 11 and then do get to benefit from those prior taxpayers' investments. We'll talk about the other side when we talk about debt, where it kind of levelizes the expense associated with those assets over the life of the assets. Some other disadvantages involve insufficient funding for capital needs. It's kind of where we are now. We don't have funding for some of these big capital in pay-go. And then the last one is lumpy capital expenditures or taxes. What this relates to is your budget. If you save money every year and then do one big project, it results in your budget fluctuating huge amounts every year. It can also result in huge fluctuations in your taxes, where you need to increase taxes dramatically one year or decrease them dramatically one year in order to fund a project. Currently, the city does use pay-as-you-go for a lot of our projects, particularly the depreciation fund in your water wastewater funds in your electric funds is a good example of where we bank money and then we have enough to do a project. So continuing to talk about pay-as-you-go, we have local revenue options. These are options that are available to the commission to increase revenues to use for future projects. We do talk about these in terms of pay-as-you-go, but these are all also options for revenue for long-term debt payments. So obviously, you have property taxes available to you, ad valorem taxes. Those are your most flexible revenue source. The commission can increase them with relatively few hoops, decrease them with even less hoops. They're paid for by the entire city, and the city commission can use those for anything at once in terms of pay-as-you-go. One caveat with property taxes is you cannot bond property taxes. There's a big asterisk on that statement that we'll get to in a little bit. But generally, the commission does not have the authority to pledge its property taxes to long-term debt. The next major area is fees for service. That's going to include things like your building permits, planning fees, solid waste rates, business taxes, cemetery fees, recreation fees. All those direct charges for services that the city charges are well within the city commission's purview to raise. Public service tax, we've talked about every year in our budgeting process. Most cities do have a public service tax of some percentage on water. If the commission elected 10% public service tax would result in about $85,000 a year annually to the general fund. Transfer from utilities, as the commission's aware, you currently have a 5% transfer from your electric fund into your general fund. The commission does have the authority to raise that transfer to really anything it wants. You could also transfer revenues from water and wastewater into your general fund. Caveat there is, as all of our utilities, we base those rates based on a break even of our expenses. So any increase in the transfer would result in an increase in your utility rates. Special assessments, we'll talk about that a little more on the next couple of slides in more detail. And then last but not least is impact or development fees. Impact and development fees are a one-time fee that are imposed upon new development, which is intended to defer the impact of growth. You can use those to pay for utilities, roads, parks, schools, fire, etc. The one big difference between special assessments and impacts is that impact fees and development fees have to go towards capital, whereas special assessments can go towards capital and or operations. Currently, the city does have development fees in its water and wastewater system. Special assessments. The commission's fairly familiar with special assessments. Obviously, the commission imposes a fire assessment within the city, and then we have the solid waste special assessment within the city as well from the county. Special assessments are charged against real property for services and capital infrastructure. As it says, it can be citywide or by districts. Case law requires that there has to be a rational nexus for the special assessment, which means that you have to be able to provide, show the special benefit to property and then have a fair and reasonable apportionment method. There has to be some sort of rational reason why a property is paying what it's paying, and you have to show the benefit it's getting for what it's paying. Service and capital assessments are restricted in the sense that if the commission adopts a special assessment for a certain reason, the commission can only spend the special assessment revenue on that reason. So for example, if you adopt a street lighting assessment, the money raised in that assessment can only be spent on street lighting. You can't use it to offset some other portion of the government. There's a variety of different assessments that are out there. There's a list of them here. Most popular statewide or number one by far is fire assessment, followed by street lighting, stormwater, solid waste, and economic development assessments. But really, as long as you can show a benefit to property, you can use a special assessment. You cannot use, it's been fought many, many times, special assessments to fund police or to fund police capital. The courts have ruled many times that law enforcement does not provide benefit to property. So currently there's no mechanism to use a special assessment for law enforcement. Two of the downsides of special assessments are the collection fee. We currently in the city of Newberry use the uniform collection method, which means that we put our special assessments on the tax bill. The tax collector collects those funds and remits them to us. The good thing about that is you get a much higher rate of compliance and collection, because if people don't pay it, it shows that they're delinquent in their taxes and they could go through the tax delinquency program process. However, we do pay the tax collector a 2% fee for that. And then there's a consulting charge. We do have to hire consultants to manage the program for us, but that's a pretty minimal fee. Most of the fee would come from starting a new assessment. So speaking of that rational nexus, there's a bunch of varieties of apportionment that are available for special assessments. All of these that are listed here have been fought in court and prevailed. Currently, we use the physical use of property as well as the amount of service/facility for our fire assessment. But it kind of depends on what kind of assessment you're looking at. Obviously, for roads, linear foot or number of units is a popular one. For economic development areas, you might want to do how far away you are from the development, those sorts of things. Special districts, kind of related to special assessments, but the commission does have the authority to create special districts within the city. There's a bunch of different types. Typically, the special district is established. The revenue that is generated from that district is used in the district to fund infrastructure within the district. So some of the types include special assessment districts, which are very popular. A lot of cities and counties use special assessment districts for road paving projects, where they create a district around a single segment of road, and the homeowners in that area pay assessment to pave that road. Downtown lighting districts are a popular one as well. Utility infrastructure districts. The city of Alachua recently implemented this in several areas throughout their city. This creates a district in an area where the city would like to see growth, master plan the utility, and then anytime anybody builds in that area, they're required to pay in some sort of an impact fee or development fee into the city for the utility infrastructure. A community redevelopment district, or CRA, obviously the commission is very familiar with those. And then community development districts exist kind of a quasi separate government entity. Celebration Point is a good example of a community development district in our area, where there's actually a separate increased sales tax amount in Celebration Point, and that incremental sales tax pays for the infrastructure that helped build that development. Debt financing. There's a lot of different kinds of debt. You can issue bonds, paper notes, commercial paper, bank notes, and I think on the next slide we'll go into some more options for debt. Some of the advantages of debt include that intergenerational equity we spoke about earlier, where with the debt payment, every year you're making a certain payment. So the revenues you're collecting that year from your current residents are paying for the services they're receiving from the capital assets. It preserves your reserves. Obviously, you're using somebody else's money, not your own money. Generally suited for larger projects. As I mentioned, the current revenues paid debt each year, and you can implement your capital projects when they're needed, not having to wait so long to accumulate debt, accumulate reserves for it. Disadvantages, obviously, you have to pay interest on it, and then there are closing costs and bond counsel and all those fun things. The revenue stream that you use for the debt is dedicated to the debt. You have to pay the debt service every year or you're in default. So you do lose some control there. Obviously, then it also limits your future borrowing and your credit quality. The more debt you have out there, the less you can take on in the future. Some things to think about is the bond rating process. The city's never gone through a bond rating, at least not a major bond rating. The bonds we've issued in the past have been relatively small. They're big to Newberry, but in the grand scheme of things, relatively small. So we've actually never been bond rated by the big three bond rating agencies. We'd probably do fairly well. One of the things that is kind of hurting us is that kind of issue where when you're like a 18-year-old and you go buy a car and your credit's terrible because you don't have any credit because you never used it. We kind of have that sort of an issue, but everything else in terms of our CAFR and our financial health and our reserves, I think would put us in a fairly good spot for bond rating. And then at the bottom here, just some statistics. I pulled these this morning based off of 2019 numbers. In Florida, the average per capita municipal debt is $1,900 per person, which is redundant. And in Newberry, the per capita debt is about $356. As the commission knows, the only debt the city currently has are 2 SRF loans related to our water and wastewater facilities. All right. So going into some of the kinds of debt financing that you have available to you, you have general obligation bond, revenue bonds, special assessment bonds. And we'll go into all those in a little bit more detail in the next couple of slides. You also have your state revolving funds available to you. Those are what we use to expand the wastewater plant and build the elevated storage tank out at Easton. You have some federal loan programs available. I believe the manager spoke about USDA not too long ago. We also have Florida Municipal Loan Council, municipal bond pools available, and then there's always commercial debt with a bank note. All right, general obligation bonds. This is the big one. General obligation bonds are known a lot of times as voted debt. The way these work is that the city would levy a separate property tax or a separate millage to fund the payment of long-term debt. Those property taxes, that separate millage, guarantees that the principal and interest will be paid every year. Voter approval is required. It has to go to referendum, has to be voted on by the people of the city. And we're only allowed to issue the bonds after it's been approved. However, because the voters have voted it and because it's funded by a special millage that will not go away, and you're putting the full faith and credit of the city, it is the most secure bond. It has the best interest rates you can get. They're done pretty frequently throughout the state, because they do get such good interest rates. However, it is a little bit of a cumbersome process. So you typically go big or go home. You're talking 10, 15, 20, $25 million for a general obligation bond. We do need to be aware of our debt millage limit. Florida statute doesn't provide a limit for how much millage debt you can take out. If the city's only allowed to have 10 mills, this millage does not count towards that. So if the citizens of Newberry wanted to vote themselves 25 mills of debt, they could do that. So it would be up to our own personal policy. It also doesn't roll into your rollback rate every year. It's just a separate debt. This slide is an example of how the voted debt millage works. So this is based off of our actual taxable values of the last 15 years, with the example of in 2007, the city issuing 1 mil of voted debt, which at the time would have been about $5.5 million. As you can see, over the course of the 15 years, as our taxable value increases, the voted millage decreases because the voted millage only exists to pay the long-term debt. So the more taxable value you have, the less millage it takes to generate that principal and interest, so it decreases. And as you can see, it's a direct inverse of each other. So if we had issued that $5 million in 2007 with voted millage at 1 mil, today that millage would be at 5.5.
Cobbling projects together typically
Yeah. Like I said, these tend to be big. They're also going to a vote of the public. So you also tend to see kind of a shotgun approach where there is a little bit of everything in there. So it's paving of roads and building of libraries and building of parks and building of fire stations. Usually there's enough of each project to kind of make somebody happy to vote for it. Usually the biggest chunk of them, what you see most cities do is issue them for roads, and they'll issue, I think City of Lighthouse Point just issued $15 million. It was $12 million went to roads and $3 million went to build a library and build a park. So you make sure that you put out there that the road paved is going to be this one in this side of town, this one in this side of town, and disperse the wealth a little bit so everybody's happy to get to the vote to adopt it. The next area is revenue bonds. In revenue bonds, you're pledging a specific kind of revenue towards the long-term debt. As I mentioned earlier, you cannot pledge your ad valorem to a revenue bond, but you can pledge other revenues. I think the only other exception is your state guaranteed revenue sharing. Currently, the city has used revenue bonds. We used them to build Champions Park, and subsequently when we refunded Champions Park, we pledged our sales tax and our non-ad valorem revenues. You can also pledge your water and wastewater rates, your local option gas taxes, anything that is available to you. Typically, voter approval is not required. It does depend on how much you're doing. Usually, if you do get voter approval, you're going to get a little bit of a better rate, but it's typically not required. There's always covenants and restrictions. There's coverage restrictions, which generally say if your debt's X, you need to make sure every year you bring in 2X in revenues to cover that. And then it becomes an audit. Part of our audit every year is auditors will report to you whether or not we have those coverages. The revenue bonds are similar to the state revolving fund loans. They act very similar. So those loans we have in water, wastewater would be the most similar to these currently. They do have a little bit higher interest rates than the general obligation bonds, again, because they're not fully backed by millage. You can adopt a special assessment to fund these. So if you wanted to adopt a road assessment to fund revenue bonds, you absolutely do that. For example, if you wanted to increase the fire assessment to build a new fire station, you could bond your fire assessment revenues. And then in true Newberry fashion, there's also such a thing called double-barreled bonds. With a double-barrel bond, you do a mixture of general obligation bonds and revenue bonds to try and get a little bit best of both worlds. They're a little bit more complicated. They do require multiple bond resolutions. And for revenue bonds, you do have to go through bond hearings. However, once you go through the bond hearing, once the judge says you're good, you're pretty golden. Nothing can really happen to those revenues until your bonds expire. So for example, there's a couple of taxes out there that used to exist that we no longer have the statutory authority to impose. But there are cities and counties throughout the state that still impose them because they went to bond. They got them through the bond hearings based off of those taxes. And now the state of Florida doesn't have the authority to take those taxes away until those bonds retire. Special assessment bonds are also sometimes known as improvement bonds. A lot of times they're used for commercial development and economic development areas. The debt is secured by the people who live in the special assessment area. Generally, they have a little bit higher interest rates because there's a lot of risk on what's going to happen with the assessment and default. One of the ways to mitigate that risk is to utilize that tax bill collection method, the uniform method of collection. They're a lot more complex than general obligation bonds, a lot more complex than revenue bonds. You're adopting an assessment and you're immediately pledging that assessment to the bonds. You would think it'd be about similar to just doing an assessment and then doing a revenue bond, but it's much more complicated. They're not very popular throughout the state. But they do exist in larger communities who have big capital commercial districts they want to fund. And then my last slide, I know everybody be happy, is this debt annual payment scenarios. We just pulled these numbers kind of out of thin air. The 10.25 million is what you could fund with the 1 mil millage increase. 1 mil, it generates approximately $470,000 a year. So with 1 mil, you at 30 years at 2%, you could raise $10.25 million a year. We did 10 and a quarter, and half of that at 5 1/8 million with some different terms. And then we did a 2% and a 1.75% to give you some of the variation in the interest rates, the fluctuation there. We currently could probably get a 1.75 or maybe even 1.5% interest rate on our debt. I don't know if that's true tomorrow. The economy's an interesting place these days. We could definitely get a 2%. So we base a lot of our stuff on a 2% rate because we'd always like to come in lower than what we project. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does the commission have any questions for Dallas? We've got to do a little playing with our sound and audio here, so there's a little delay between staff in the chambers and myself. That was a crash course in bonding. Any questions? Okay, we will move on then. Mike, who's got round two? Oh, we have public comment. Okay. Well, let's go to our phone number. Ladies and gentlemen, we have just got a crash course in all the different kinds of bonds and districts and zones and CRAs that we can create. If you have any questions about any of those, you jotted down any notes you'd like to clarify, there's a phone number that you should be seeing on your screen at this point in time. All you need to do is call that phone number. Once we get you into the meeting, you'll see at the bottom of your screen a little hand symbol. Click that hand symbol. We'll know that you'd like to address the commission. You'd like to follow up on one of those avenues for the city to raise revenues. And we'll make sure you have the opportunity to address the commission. Dallas, do we have anybody with their hand up?
Surprisingly, no.
No? All right. I thought we'd have a lot of follow-up questions on that as well, but you did such a great job explaining it. You hit all the points. Okay, let's go back to the slide deck. And Mr. New, are you taking over from here?
Get myself, am I unmuted? I'm unmuted. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I'm taking over for here. We're going to cover the three classes of projects, general fund projects that the commission asked us to look at. We'll jump into the one that it seems to be most talked about in the community is roads. There's first slide going through something you hear me say often, that from a municipal perspective, a local government perspective, we think that a local government's first priority is to maintain roads in the fashion that they were dedicated. So if we have an inventory of paved and unpaved roads, staff believes that the commission, the communities, the city's obligation is higher to maintain those than to go improve others. So we make them a priority one. Just a couple of the differences, the things that we all know that, the paved roads certainly come with a higher initial cost, typically paid for by the developer and rolled into lot cost, but the lower annual cost to maintain. We expect a 30-year life out of a typical local street, and we try to fund reconstruction of local roads on a 30-year cycle. With unpaved roads, clearly the upfront cost is lower. In today's environment, our LDRs do not permit local roads to come into the city's inventory unpaved. They are paved to meet a certain standard to minimize the ongoing operating costs by the community. And as the commission is well aware, we have quite the inventory of unpaved roads. Some of our own, some are county roads that we maintain under an interlocal agreement with Alachua County, and we maintain them on a 3-week cycle. There are a few caveats to that, weather dependent, but we typically maintain all of our unpaved roads. We grade them on a 3-week grading cycle. Priority 2 roads or a second priority for the community would be to improve city-owned roads, going from unpaved to paved, or from an improvement would also be unpaved to chip seal or chip seal to pave. We consider chip seal to be a road treatment and not a true road improvement. Around our community, we have a number of chip sealed roads, and while their day-to-day maintenance they don't require a 3-week grading cycle, they pothole up a lot faster. We think they have a life cycle of 10 to 15 years before they're going to need to be redone, and they're typically coming in at about 1/3 of paving costs. So staff's recommendation is that if an opportunity to improve a road from an unpaved road exists, that we should try to go all the way to paving and get that 30-year life out of it. A third priority for staff would be to improve county-owned roads. We've had a lot of discussion with Alachua County. There are a lot of unpaved county roads within our city boundaries. The county wants to transfer them to us. State law clearly says that in order to do so, they have to have mutual agreement with us. Typically in government entities, that means that they're going to improve them to our standards before that transfer happens. There's lots of literature out there. I'd also just state as explicitly as I can that almost without exception, those roads were created by the county through their policies to be collector roads. And typically collector roads wouldn't come into a city's inventory. Usually the county maintains control of all collector roads within the county. Some of these roads will probably never get there, and as dirt roads, clearly we don't see them as collectors today, but that was their intention when they were originally created. Good timing. So spend a little bit of time. We have a road maintenance program. It's a resurfacing program, and it's been in place now. I believe we're in our 4th year now. It's been funded at about $100,000 a year annually. And those funds are coming from our local option fuel tax funding. So when we put that program into place, we were under the impression that we were going to see increasing revenues from our local option fuel tax. And there was discussion on the dais. I wouldn't say it was firm direction, but I would more couch it as it was the commission's intent to, as our fuel tax revenues increased, the revenues towards our resurfacing program would follow suit. We have discussed with the commission a road improvement program, but have not to identify a funding source for that. And I believe that is a big purpose of the commission giving us direction to have this workshop and to analyze these projects. Dallas is going to show you with the next few clicks. These are roads that have been resurfaced since the commission put the program in place, as Newberry Place, and then some streets over adjacent in the southwest neighborhood near Newberry High School. Next group of roads that classification that we talk about is not road maintenance, but road improvement. We look at them in kind of in 3 categories: unpaved roads within our urban core, unpaved roads in more rural areas that we own, and then unpaved roads in rural areas that the county owns. So this first group are roads in the downtown district that are unpaved. You can see on the map there, you can see some in solid red and some in dashed red. The dashed reds are unpaved roads that currently we don't have right-of-way rights for, but they are utilized. In some cases, they're the only ingress and egress for a residence. They're in CSX right-of-way. So there's a little bit of a caveat that if we go to improving those roads, whether we can actually get right-of-way use from CSX. My belief is that at minimum, CSX is comfortable with us utilizing them. I believe they would grant us easements to do that paving, but wouldn't want to advance on that without the commission being aware of that risk. So we have about 1.7 miles of unpaved road in our downtown district. Of that, about 0.4 miles is located within CSX right-of-way. We estimate that the cost to pave those roads in their entirety would be $1.35 million. Some of those roads, and if you'll hit some of those roads, the ones in the boxes there, we've identified as very strong candidates for a CDBG grant program, which requires a 25% match. That's about $800,000 worth of paving, and the city's 25% match would be $200,000. That's a great cost benefit for the city if we elect to move on those. We currently have a CDBG grant open, and we're not eligible to apply for a new one. That's the housing grant that we're coming towards the end of. As soon as it sunsets and we're allowed to make application for our next CDBG grant, staff recommends that we apply for a grant for road improvement and with a local match of $200,000. If we were able to obtain that grant, just to point out, this next bullet point is that it'd be a total cost of $750,000 to the city to pave every unpaved road in the downtown area with the grant in play. Next slide, please. And this is just a worksheet that shows essentially the same information. It's how we tallied it in order to make those maps and come up with that. But we've measured each of the road segments to develop their total length. Our estimated paving costs are $150 per foot of road. That's based on actual Newberry data. You'll recall about a year ago, we paved Southwest 4th Avenue down near Newberry High School. I rode that street today and noticed that 2 brand new homes had popped out on that, and it made it a nice little neighborhood. And it occurred to me that when the city will invest in some infrastructure, generally we'll see some nice private development occur along those types of corridors. Again, the balance, about 1.7 miles of road in total, and a total price tag of about $1.35 million takes care of the downtown unpaved roads. Staff puts those, you can go ahead and advance. Staff puts those at higher priority simply because the density and the trips on those roads would be higher than what you'd find in a rural setting. This next slide shows the unpaved roads in rural areas. So you can see that the city has nearly 9 miles of unpaved rural roads, and at a cost of $120,000 per mile, we could chip seal them all for a little over $1 million, or we could pave them all for about $4.45 million. The city also maintains an inventory of 3.5 miles of chip sealed roads, which could be paved at a cost of $1.4 million. Within that same rural area, the county owns 7.5 miles of unpaved roads. We know them well because we talk about them a lot. We seem to get more complaints about county roads that are unpaved than anything else in the city. The cost to chip seal them is a little less than $500,000. The cost to pave the county's roads would be $3.75 million. And the cost to pave the county's 9.3 miles of chip sealed road within our city boundaries would be $4.6 million. One of the things I'd point out is these cost estimates are what we believe to be total cost. I believe that in any program, whether they're city-owned roads, that these are great candidates for assessments, road improvement assessments, where local government would pay a share. And it's not uncommon for local government to pay 50 or 67% of that share and let the residents that live adjacent, that access that road on a daily basis, pay the rest through some sort of a special assessment on their tax bill. In these instances, the cost to construct are so high and the density of homes is sparse, it can be daunting. So I think we would be sensitive if the commission says, I want you to put together a program, Mike, that would pave those roads with a combination of assessment and city expenditures. We would be sensitive to what people are willing to bear on an annual tax bill. For example, our fire assessment is currently $175 a year. It's not super popular, but we don't have a revolt. I think if we put together a program where a road assessment was more than $1,000 a year, I think that would be unpalatable to residents. And so we would be looking at something that would be closer in line, raising revenues to something closer in line to what we're seeing with our fire assessment today, if the commission directed us to move that way. Next slide, please. Here's going to be just kind of a series of tables that show the exact, these are city-owned rural unpaved roads that identifies the road and the road segments and its length, its cost to chip seal, its cost to pave, just a tabular form of the slide that you saw in summary before, and with an indicator on the bottom that we're estimating chip sealing to be $120,000 a mile. The county is really the only entity that we're aware of that's doing a lot of chip sealing. I don't see any private companies doing it. I'm not really familiar with a lot of other counties that are doing it. So they're the best source for data, and they have recently chip sealed several roads in Newberry, 226th, 202, and maybe 94th. And so they have not provided us a more updated cost, but they are working on it. They did indicate that they have updated cost, and they'll share that with us as soon as they've tabulated it. Again, the paving cost is something that we've put together from our own database here in Newberry, very limited database, but we believe that $500,000 per mile to pave is accurate. And again, unpaved roads in rural areas, we're right at 9 miles with a paving cost of $4.4 million. These are the chip sealed roads that we owned within our city boundaries. We have 3.5 miles. The cost to improve them from chip seal to pave is $1.4 million. You can see that we're still using a paving cost of $500,000 per mile. And you'd think, well, if they're already chip sealed, couldn't we just add pavement? The thought is that chip sealing never addresses road base. So, and when you build asphalt roads, the most crucial part of that is the base. So the belief is that you can't just add asphalt on top of chip seal, that you would end up with a formula for failure. And there are several roads in Newberry that we can point to that these are what happened when you put asphalt on an improperly prepared base. So I think that the cost to pave a chip sealed road is comparable to the cost of paving an unpaved road. This is a slide that shows the county-owned roads within our district. They have quite a bit. You can see here in total, this is a little over 16, almost 17 miles of unpaved roads. The cost to pave their dirt roads would be $444,000. No, to chip seal would be $444,000. Cost to pave them would be nearly $4 million. And the cost to pave the chip sealed roads in town, like Southwest 15th is probably the one that we're most familiar with, would be $4.65 million. And tables to support that. And the commission has all this in their backup. So for each road segment, when a citizen says, I live on Southwest 46th, west of County Road 337, we can look that up and know that the cost that we believe that the paving cost for that, it's a mile long segment, is $500,000. And that staff proposes on all the county roads, county-owned roads, if we decide to move on those. I'd mentioned a 50-50 split, or 2/3, 1/3 between the city and the residents that benefit. If on the county roads, I would propose a 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. County pays 1/3, city pays 1/3, and the residents pay 1/3 through some sort of a road assessment fee. These are the county's chip sealed roads within our municipal service area. And this is a summary slide that shows that our current funding level for resurfacing roads is, again, $100,000 a year. We've been hoping to see that increase as our loft revenues increase. You'll recall that 2 years ago, our funding levels in loft were $150,000 a year roughly. And we work very hard with the county to see an increase in funding. We were supposed to get an increase over a 5-year period of about $30,000 a year that would get us all the way up to $300,000 a year. So since that program started taking place, 2020 was the first year we were supposed to see increased revenues. The formula changed. We're getting a higher percentage of share of the funding, of the sales tax funding, gas tax funding, but with coronavirus, people are buying less fuel. So actually the revenues that we're seeing from local option fuel tax, gross revenues, are less than they were last year. And they're projected to be less for next year when we'd see an additional percent increase. So next year we anticipated receiving 210,000. I think our current projections are probably closer to 175. So we're not seeing that increase as fast as we thought, although, and the county always reserves the right to reconsider that. We think if we can get past the first few years that we'll settle in and have some confidence in it being there. But I would say that that taking out debt, believing that that was going to increase to 300,000 right now is a bit risky. I think that there's still too much conversation in the county with what they're going to do with local option fuel tax. That concludes roads. This may be a good stopping point. Well, no, I guess I'll do this final slide. This final slide just simply shows the different tools that are available to the commission for improving roads. And you can see that of all the ones that Dallas has gone through, all of them are usable for road improvement.
Okay. Will you mute yourself, Mike? I think this is a good place to stop and ask some questions. There's a lot of information in there, and I know that all the commissioners and myself have spent probably the last 18 to 24 months talking with various residents about roads. So this has been the conversation. What's our long-term plan? What are we doing to have the best roads in Alachua County? And there's lots of options and things that we can go here. And I want to stress to not necessarily the commission, but to anybody watching at home, all of the ideas and options that the city manager just went through, they're just ideas and they're options. Nobody has said, this is what we're doing, or this is how we're going about it. This is a workshop. It's an opportunity to have an open conversation about how we want to move forward. So I just want to make sure that we're all operating under that. This is a chance for us to throw spaghetti on the wall, see what sticks, and see what ideas we like best. So with that, commissioners, ideas, questions, thoughts? Commissioner Northleaf?
Yeah, the unpaved roads that the city and the county trade out on maintenance costs. I'd like to see, I don't know if it's possible or not, but the county and the city trade some of the roads like Northwest 8th Lane and Southwest 186th Street, kind of clean those up where the city is fully maintaining or fully owns the road all the way to, I guess you'd call it a connector street or back to somewhere substantial. I know years ago, the city and the county had the begin county maintenance, end county maintenance signs up everywhere, but to kind of clean those up and trade some of them where there's not the segments. I don't know if that's a possible deal, but as far as the paving versus the chip seal, I wouldn't be in favor of chip sealing because I just seen it on several roads just not hold up very well. Like you said earlier, the lifespan don't seem to be as good as what it was promoted whenever it was first done. If you're going to spend the money and the work to be harassing the residents trying to drive to and from their house on the roads, I'd just soon go ahead and pave it and get that 25, 30 year or longer lifespan out of it. That's kind of all I got to say right now.
Commissioner Norfleet makes a good point. We've never attempted this with the county to do a trade. It's always been, the county's stance has always been, we want you to take all of the roads inside, whether there are roads, whether we created the road. We don't, none of that past history matters to us. We just want you to take the road. So we've never, as far as I know, even proffered a straight up trade just to make the segments go away and say this road all becomes yours and this road all becomes ours. We did have a lengthy road conversation with the county, and we did propose an option for them to be able to give us roads. And it was kind of what the city manager was saying. They would pay roughly a third of the upgrade cost for some future time. And then we would take those roads. And there were some other caveats in there. I don't know that they did ultimately say no to that deal. We're trying to continue to work with them on that, see if there's a solution there. But that would, in essence, it wouldn't necessarily be a trade, but it would be a way for the county to get out from under some of these roads. And then the maintenance would be a whole lot clearer and less confusing for the residents. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Commissioner Farnsworth, are you leaning towards the unmute button?
I am.
Okay.
I just want to say I agree with Commissioner Norfleet. I think that if we do anything, we should pave the roads. I've driven down some of these other roads that have been chip sealed, and I mean they need it again already. So I think it's kind of a waste of money.
I would tend to agree. I think you could also probably make an argument if there's really not very many people that live down the road, it does a better job of holding up. But if you've driven down 15, obviously there's way too much traffic on that road to make chip seal an option. It didn't hold up very well at all. And I also, I'm always concerned about the chip seal encouraging people to drive faster without having those setbacks and the safety of it. So, Commissioner Coleman, did I see a hand come up? Go ahead.
So really what we're looking at is about $7.6 million for our unpaved and chip sealed roads. Am I correct?
Mike, you want to, you're talking about the urban core chip sealed roads? I'm going to mute myself and let you and Mike make sure we have this right.
Urban core, rural areas, and chip and seal rural areas.
Yes, I'm going to actually run through that math, which is, Dallas, you want to put that slide back up that shows it was 1.335. Yep. All right, we got an echo. 1.35, 4.45, and 1.75. So that is, are you doing the math over there for me?
7.5.
Okay, that's 2.1. Looks like it's about 6.5 million to pave all those roads. Now, again, we get a little bit of a discount if we can get a grant in there, but assuming no grants, just gross cost to pave every city-owned street, 6 to 6.5 million.
Cool.
7.5. I didn't carry the
7,550.
Dang it, I hate.
Yeah.
You're right. It is 7.5.
And our annual payment for that would be.
Rick, you're muted.
Am I? You can't hear me? I'm not.
Never mind, you're good, Rick.
I'm good.
Yeah, you're fine.
So what we're looking at is an annual payment of for our citizens would be almost 300. Would it be what? it'd be over $300,000 a year to pay this. Am I right? I just don't know how many years you got on that. I'm looking at annual. Go back to the screen again.
Yeah, we're
60,000, 198, and 78,000.
pulling that up right now, Commissioner Coleman.
Right. So the annual, we're going to be a little over $300,000 a year. Am I correct? Who am I talking to?
You're talking to Mike. He's got himself muted while he does the addition in his head, but he just
Okay.
nod. So you're looking at about a $300,000 a year, $350,000 a year payment if you wanted to do all of it.
Right. And then if we have a road assessment tax, whatever you want, of 1%, I can't remember what that number was a year.
If we assess to the whole town, or assess just to the area getting the
I'm
improvement.
talking about the whole city. I'm talking about just like Trenton does, or
1%.
Gilchrist County.
1% millage, or is this a special assessment?
Yeah, that's where I was confused. I don't know what, if we could, where I'm getting at here is we're looking at roughly $300,000 a year to cover the cost or cover the payment, debt service on getting everything paid. Am I right there, guys?
We're doing the math right now, but it looks like you are correct. A 1 mil increase would cover the debt service on paving all of the roads.
Just a 1 mil?
1 mil would generate 469,000. The debt service would be about 350,000. So 1 mil would pay.
So a 0.75 would probably be the number then that would cover everything.
I don't do fractions, Commissioner Coleman, so I'm going to wait for Dallas to answer that question. But he does fractions quick, just like you.
Okay.
You get 0.75 mil. 1 mil would do it. So what Commissioner Coleman is discussing right now, and just so we all make sure, can you highlight and share what we're talking about? Because we are talking about paving the urban core, talking about paving the rural areas, and paving the chip sealed areas, the chip sealed roads in the rural areas. Those are the three sections that we were presented that Commissioner Coleman is saying we could pave all of those areas for a 0.75% mil increase. Is that right, Commissioner Coleman?
You're dead on.
Okay.
But
It's highlighted on the screen for you folks at home. So that would take care of rural areas, urban areas, everybody all at one time.
just want the other commissioners to weigh in, if they would, on how they also feel for the citizens to be hit with a 3/4 of a mil. I know there's a savings because now we're not going to have a motor grader anymore. Am I correct, Mike? You can head nod on that.
Commissioner Coleman, that's not completely accurate. We still have a maintenance agreement with the county to maintain county roads. It's not to say we have the ability to exit that agreement. And I'm sure that we would start working that way to exit that agreement. But but we currently have a responsibility to maintain about 13 miles of unpaved county roads that are close to our borders.
Okay. But we're also making money off of that, correct?
We are getting the loft gas tax.
Lost.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I want this discussion I'm glad we're here now. I just kind of wanted the rest of the commissioners, what their feeling is. I mean, being fiscally conservative, it's a tax, but it's infrastructure. It's safety reasons. Holder grade. So I want other people to weigh in, other commissioners to weigh in on this.
Hey,
Well,
can you hear me,
possible.
Mayor?
I want everybody to remember we have other projects that we want to look at. Roads is first and foremost, I think, in everybody's mind for that word that Commissioner Coleman just said. It's our core infrastructure. So it's certainly something that we need to think about right off the bat. But we still do have other capital improvement plans. I don't want anybody to feel like they have to commit right now unless you say, hey, I'm in committed for roads. That's top on my list. That's perfectly fine. And we've talked about debt service. We've talked about raising the millage, lots of ways to go about handling this. Does anybody want to weigh in on their thoughts to Commissioner Coleman's? And I'm not hearing him propose it. I'm hearing him say it could happen for this amount. What do you guys think, Commissioner Farnsworth?
I got a couple of questions. One, does the estimate for the road improvements, does that include any acquisition of property that would have to occur?
That's a good question. Any right away? Can you give a head nod to that, Mike, or is that a longer answer?
I'll make it a short answer, Mr. Mayor. With the exception of the properties that I told you, we have some roads that are within CSX. The roads that we identified, we have clear title to, I guess you would say it, but there's a small segment that are in CSX that we would have to get cleared up to move forward on.
Okay. And before I'd make any commitment to any increase in millage rate, I'd like to see all the options available before I make any kind of decision.
Mr. Jones?
The only thing I would add to Mike's answer is on a particular road segment, if it was determined that you couldn't address the stormwater within the right of way, it might, and I stress might, on a case-by-case basis, be necessary to look at some property acquisition for stormwater. But most cases, I believe we could address it within the existing road right of way.
Commissioner-elect
Mayor,
Clark,
I got a
did
question.
I hear you try to get in? I can't see your face, so if you're trying to wave at me, I can't see you.
Mayor, can you hear me?
We got you. Go right ahead.
Okay, so on the road, I'm just saying, I know I'm not in there yet, but as a future talking here, if you're paving that first slide that we had up of rural roads, I don't think that's the correct mileage. I don't believe that is correct. If that's chip sealed roads already, 202nd, 3.5 miles by itself. So anyway, and when we pave a road, are we going to widen them or do anything, or are we just going to go to the base of where the chip seals are right now?
I think the answer to that question would be a little bit different for each project. Did you want to take that, Mike or Jamie, and give a percentage? About 80% of them we'd have to widen the roads or anything like that? Have we got that deep yet? Is that a Jamie question or is that a Mike question? If we pave these roads, do we need to widen it up? Hang on, there we go.
All right. Mr. Mayor, I think that generally on the rural roads, a 20 or 22 foot wide road is appropriate, and that's typically what they are now, simply to keep speeds down. We typically have 50 foot wide right of ways, even on these unpaved roads. That is sufficient. To Jamie's point, we'd need swales, so that would widen them to some point, but I expect that the asphalt surface is probably in the 20 foot range, and it's designed to try to keep speeds low. To Commissioner-elect Clark's other question, I mean, all of this stuff is tabular. We could go through it. His 202 is a county-owned, city-maintained road. It's 3 miles long. It's a chip seal road, and it's 3 miles from State Road 26 to Southwest 46 Terrace, which is the end of our maintenance responsibilities.
Does that answer your question, Mark?
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out exactly which roads we were talking about on the pavement and the chip seal. And Mr. Mayor, I mean, I'm with making it better for everybody, but I think I lean towards chip seal. If we're going to pave it, we're going to increase speed. If we're going to increase speed, we got to get some of these trees out of the way. So I think on my standpoint, I lean toward keeping it chip sealed, no potholes. It's $1 million every 10 years or $4 million up front. So I think for me, I could budget a little money toward the chip sealing and keeping them slower traffic. I think we pave it. We're really going to open the gate for the speed.
Okay. Other
That's just food for thought down the line.
Yes, sir. Okay. Other commissioner comments. Commissioner Norfleet.
The kind of to what Commissioner Coleman was saying, you know, I don't have a problem with that. The only issue that I would have on paving all the roads is I wouldn't want to pave a segment that we jumped over a county segment of road to pave a city road and then have a dirt road going to a paved road. I would only want to pave, you know, roads that were tying back into a paved road. And far as swell drainage areas and stuff, if the landowners along a road are willing to cooperate and maybe give up some easement, whatever it is, 20 foot or whatever along the front of their property for a paved road, maybe we don't pave that road. There's, you know, because it's going to benefit them down the road and everybody, you know. That's all I got.
I do believe that if we move forward with a plan like this, I think that we could go to the county and say, we're chip sealing this half mile and this half mile, and you guys own a quarter mile in between. Do you want to partner on that? And I think the answer there would probably be a yes. Commissioner Martin?
Rick, is there a compounding effect here where if we decide to charge this extra millage, that the property owner is going to get a bump in their property value, so they're paying yet again?
Mr. Mayor, to answer Commissioner Martin's, no, not at all.
So the property value is not going to go up, or they're just not going to get charged?
The property, it's kind of hard to hear you, but if you're asking about property value, with it being a dirt road to a paved road, it's not going to change. It's not the way it's assessed.
I have heard that reiterated many times at the county level when the county commissioners say, well, we paved it, the property values are going up, that'll pay for the road. And their accountants turn and say, no, it doesn't work that way. It makes kind of common sense that it would, because you've increased the value to some degree, but
on a bank appraisal, yes, Mr. Mayor, but when it comes to mass appraisals for your taxes, it's only your single family dwellings and stuff like that, your miscellaneous. It's not if you got a paved road or not.
okay.
I do have one more question.
Commissioner Martin?
So if we're looking at a special assessment millage for roads, mixing in the loft taxes, what can we realistically look at with regards to kind of the net cost to the taxpayer? You get that?
I did not quite follow that. So you're saying if we move forward with Rick's plan.
Well, so one millage is $469,000. We also would have money coming in from loft, although that is arguably decreasing because of COVID and less gas purchased. What are we, like, adding the two together? How much are we talking about? Because can we, if we offset the 469, for instance, by some of the loft money?
I got you. Mr. Mayor, this year's projected revenues, back to when we got into the current agreement, we're going to be 210. And after year 5, which would be 3 years from now, year 5 of that agreement, our revenues were going to go up to 300,000. So from today to a 3-year period from now, we anticipated an additional $90,000 in lost revenue, not counting COVID. So and not counting the the county commission reconsidering the formula split for law. But we believe that if all things get to where they should be, that we'd see about $90,000 a year increase in lost revenues 3 years from now.
And would this,
to add to that point, a loft revenue is split into 2 functions currently. A portion of it on operations of the Streets and Roads Department. The other portion of it currently funds your resurfacing program you already have in place to resurface your currently paved roads that we mentioned in the beginning.
Correct.
We haven't been able to fully fund that program. We've been funding to the best of our ability. With the increased loft revenue we did receive, we added more funding to it. But because we're not being able to fully fund it, we kind of have to bank money for a year or two, pave, a couple of blocks of road, wait a year or two, bank it up. Our plan would be once loft is fully funding that repaving program, we could focus on repaving our current paved roads that need to be paved in our jurisdiction.
Correct.
How did that
I'm gonna make a public works director out of Dallas yet. He's exactly right. I would chime in that same thing. If you have to fund your operation, you have to fund your resurfacing program to protect the investments you've already made in paved roads. So I would caution, dedicating any of the lost money towards a new paving program.
Commissioner Martin, did that answer your question? You have a follow-up?
Good.
Commissioner Farnsworth?
Yeah, I was wondering if we were to finance this, or what would happen to the current amount of money that we have, like $100,000 that we're putting in every year already? What would become of that money?
It would continue to be allocated to the resurfacing program or the maintenance. There's 2 categories in that gas tax money that we get. So it would keep doing everything that it's already planned to do. And I think Mr. Jones made a good point. You don't want to steal from Peter to pay Paul, because if you're going to make this investment, you want to make sure that you're continuing to take care of that investment. So you wouldn't want that repaving program to go away. Otherwise, you'll just be putting yourself back in the same boat 10, 15 years down the line.
Okay.
Commissioner Coleman.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to touch the loft stuff for that. I think that's, we're always going to have that anyway, because, there's a lot of roads that these, here we're hitting the dirt roads to fix, but we still have plenty of roads that needs to be resurfaced, or the chip and seal roads that are even 202s starting to see potholes there. It's that chip and seal is, I agree with Commissioner Norfleet there. The chip and seal is not the way to go. It's a good 10-year temporary fix, but it seems like we spend a lot of our time out refixing them. That 202 is not even, so that's all I got.
Okay, Commissioner Norfleet.
On the roads that the city maintains for the county, how much is the city receiving from the county? I guess that's through the interlocal agreement.
It's through the gas tax, the loft.
So if we wasn't maintaining any of the county roads, we wouldn't be getting the loft tax, or we would?
That's a complicated question. We increase, one of the reasons we were able to negotiate the increase of loft was we changed the formula to the loft was for the miles of road. So they included those miles of road when in the negotiations, because we said if you include them, we'll take care of them. So I think technically we could stop maintaining them. Although if we signed an interlocal agreement that says we will, or is that just a gentleman's agreement that we will maintain those miles of road?
Mr. Mayor, we have it's an interlocal agreement with 7 amendments that says that we will maintain these 13 miles of roads. Each one of them speaks to a separate road. And we have the ability to, with 30 days notice, to exit that agreement. So the gentleman's agreement was that they would give us credit for in our loft formula for those 13 miles of road. So if we, if they pull those roads out of our loft agreement, we would have, within 30 days, we could say, you're maintaining them, you're on. If we, on the other hand, decide to pull the plug on that agreement, give notice, it would take the county and the city of Gainesville a little bit more time to affect our loft share. But we agreed that we would yield to that if that was the gentleman's agreement. That's not in writing.
Not sure if that answered your question, Commissioner Norfleet, or not.
Yeah, it kind of does. I know we talked about how that agreement was before, but one other thing, how much is the county chipping in any extra for some of the higher maintenance cost on some of the chip seal roads that having to put asphalt down? And if not, how much is the loft program or the loft tax covering the maintenance of them roads?
Mike, do you know the answer to that? Or is that a Jamie question?
I know at least part of the answer. We do what we consider straight maintenance. So we handle mowing, we handle pothole, we handle grading, we handle sign replacement if signs are damaged, and anything that we consider to be more of an owner's responsibility, such as major improvement, permitting, either for roadway connection or for utility construction. Recently, we had a request to put a speed hump on Southwest 15th. We believe that's an owner's responsibility, so we passed that request along to Alachua County Public Works Department. I think if Jamie has anything to add on top of that, he does have more day-to-day insights than I do.
Well, right now, it's my understanding that the majority of the loss that we're collecting every year is being obligated to the actual resurfacing portion. Is that not correct, Dallas?
I'm not sure that they could hear you, Jamie. We've got limited volume speakers on my computer. Can you speak up a little?
What I was saying is currently we're funding our resurfacing program between $100,000 to $150,000 a year for the last 3 years. And if I understand the law correctly, that's about equal to the collections. So basically the loss is going to the resurfacing portion right now.
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor, I agree with Mr. Jones. Next fiscal year, we have about $100,000 programmed for the local option portion of loft, which goes straight into operations. In the previous years where we saw increases, we did put some of those increases in directly into funding of streets and roads maintenance. Well, it all goes in streets and road maintenance, but directly into roads in terms of motor grader fuel, increased lime rock. Portion of it went also to hire the inmate squad that the commission approved several years ago. Next year, the last several years, we've been receiving between $70,000 and $80,000 in the new local option gas tax, which is restricted only to capital expenditures in your roads and streets program, which is what we use for resurfacing. However, as Jamie and the manager can tell you, our resurfacing has typically been between $150,000 to $200,000. So every year we gain $80,000, we put in the bank, and the next year we spend $160,000 of what we had plus what we gained that year.
Okay. Waiting. Good now. Okay. Not to rush this conversation, but it is 7:30, and we do have 2 other large concepts to present to the commission. So I think we have what it sounds like is at least an interest to continue this conversation and to be creative when it comes to funding it. So unless anyone has a really pressing last question that they'd like to ask staff, I'd like to go ahead and move us along. And Dallas, we still don't have anyone with their hand raised in the waiting room because I know we've had a lot of residents that want us to do something about the roads. But I'm not sure how many we knew that this conversation was happening tonight. Do we have anybody with their hand up?
Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Is commission ready to move to the next topic? Okay. Well, we're not ending this conversation. We're just going to move on and we'll keep this going in the back of our minds. Mike, are we doing Seaboard Drive is next? All right. Take it away, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Second project that we
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Second project that we were asked to bring for the City Commission for consideration is really an economic development project, and it's the redevelopment of Seaboard Drive. So the general project scope are identified right there. The primary focus would be redevelopment of the street from Northwest First Avenue, which is north of State Road 26, across State Road 26 down to Southwest Fifth Avenue, which is the road just south of the old airplane warehouse. Staff there's a third segment kind of laying out there to provide some interconnectivity, and we'll share that in just a second. But it would be a downtown redevelopment type project that provides for, walking, multimodal trail, landscaping, streetscaping, hardscaping, things of that nature. Staff believes that the component of it, the segment north of State Road 26, will be wrapped into the State Road 26 project, the Twin Pairs project, and those costs would be borne by FDOT. So I have a meeting with DOT tomorrow. That'll be part of our discussion. So this is a rendering, and I'm going to show two different redevelopment plan concepts. These are not a construction plan. It could be very different than this, but the old adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words, trying to put together an idea of what a redevelopment plan might look like. And also this particular rendering shows improvements that are not on public property and would not be part of the city's scope of work. Again, it's trying to create an image of what redevelopment might look like as well. But you can see that starting on the right side of the screen is Northwest First Avenue. We'd provide for parking, sidewalks on both sides of the streets, and landscaping, as well as a multimodal trail. And then in this particular concept, the street goes through the middle of a privately owned parcel, which will require, it's actually an old right-of-way that has been conveyed to the property owner that would come back to the city if we struck this deal. And again, I'm not suggesting that we would, but it would dead end at Fifth Avenue, which is an existing road. And then from Fifth Avenue, we could also extend down the railroad right away to connect to 15th Avenue. Currently, we have Southwest 260th and 255th is really the only ways to get from Newberry Road to Southwest 15th. And we get a lot of complaints from the neighborhood of high traffic. Adding a third connector in there would, in theory, cut traffic on those other two streets by about 50%, or at least our existing traffic. It'd just give, one additional way for traffic to make its way from State Road 26 to 15th. So next slide shows a second concept. And in this concept, the main drag stays right on the CSX right away and doesn't cut through the middle of the development. Again, just renderings of what it could look like. if the commission and the community decides that wants a project like this, we would move into a design mode, and we'd ask the commission the features they like and the ones that they don't like, and we would incorporate them into a design. Again, to the left of the paper, you can't see that there is a segment that would extend down to 15th. Staff's thought that the amenities, the hardscaping and the landscaping would stop at 5th in any situation, and the extension between 5th and 15th would look more just like a local road with hard surface and asphalt surface, maybe parallel parking on one side and sidewalks, but no big landscaping features and things of that nature that more associated with commercial development. And this next slide is simply a cross section of what that plan looks like. You can see on the far left is the existing railroad track, the multimodal trail, some landscaping, parking, 2 travel lanes, and another sidewalk. In order to move this project forward, the current Seaboard Drive as we know it is not a public right-of-way. It's a CSX right-of-way. It's a road that was constructed in CSX right-of-way, some of which we have authorization for, some of which we don't. We've met with a railroad consulting expert who indicates that it is well within the type of easement that CSX would grant us to do this whole project. He doesn't see it as, other than the time it takes to get through a CSX process, he doesn't see them coming back with a no, we're not going to permit that, given the scope that we are proposing. Next slide shows the cost estimates associated for this project. We've considered segment 1 to be the 1 block section north of State Road 26. It's a 290-foot long section. Again, I believe that DOT was going to incorporate this in their Twin Pairs project. We've estimated the cost to improve the road, reconstruct the road right at $600,000, and the utility improvements associated with that, including water, sewer, and electric, be in the $140,000 range. Segment 2 is the biggest portion of the project. Is the main focus of the project. That's a 1,700-foot section, which is roughly 1/3 of a mile. The cost for the street reconstruction are estimated to be right at $1.8 million, and associated utilities are at $800,000. The final segment is from 5th to 15th. It's really optional to provide connectivity. The cross section of the road looks more like a residential road, a local street, than the prior cross section would look. The road segment for that piece component, which is about 1,000 feet long, about a 1/5 of a mile, is right at $1 million. The utility component associated with that is about $456,000. Funding for these projects, if the commission wants to go there, is a couple. One, the utility components would be funded out of the utility funds and not the general fund. Generally, I think the roads, one of the candidates for this would be a CRA. Now, we don't currently have a CRA, but we have been working on getting one. This would be the ideal anchor CRA type of project, although I think the total cost for this probably exceeds what we think that is the CRA would be to make an annual payment for, at least on in its early years. So we may have to, if we want to use a CRA as a potential funding source, we likely would need to supplement it with other types of funding sources as well. Again, as we said in the beginning, this is primarily an ED type of project where we think a big investment in the city's downtown would spur a lot of private redevelopment within our downtown area, and hopefully change the trend from seeing our downtown being less of a destination and turn it into more of a destination. So this final slide here shows the different funding sources available for this project. And that concludes staff's presentation on the economic development project, and we would be a good stopping point for questions.
I know that coming hard off the heels of a conversation about paving all of the roads and increasing that infrastructure, this may seem more like a frivolous type of concept. I would caution against that thought. This idea has come out of a lot of conversations with different commissioners at different points in the last couple of years, but it has also come out of a lot of conversations with businesses that have come and talked to us about our downtown area and what they think would work and those kinds of things. So, this would be certainly an exciting addition to our downtown area, and it would give us that walkable downtown area that we hear a lot about from the businesses that are already downtown. Any thoughts, ideas about this from the commission? Commissioner Farnsworth first, and then Commissioner Norfleet.
I think it was such a good idea. Why don't some developer do it instead of us taxing the citizens of Newberry to pay for something like this?
Well, if we can figure out a way to do it through the CRA, then that is what the CRA is for. I think there's an awful lot of city infrastructure here that it would be difficult to say to a developer, that's your job. I think they could all pay a proportional share of it, but at some point we need an overarching driver of the project to say this is what it's going to look like and this is how it's going to be. Was that your only thought, Commissioner Farnsworth? I'm not trying to cut you off. If you're done.
I mean, that's for now.
Okay. Commissioner Norfleet?
I think the concept, I think it looks pretty good. Even if things change on it, upgrading that street needs some help on that street as far as making it look good, especially when Main Street has their fall festival there. But Mike, whenever you meet with DOT tomorrow, why don't you just get them to pay for the whole thing?
That's kind of the idea, right? Trying to time this up with the two-way pairs coming through. Commissioner Martin?
My only even input here is to fashion it in such a way that we could potentially get it to connect all the way down to Southwest 15th. That seems to make the most logical sense if we look out over the horizon, because we've got a lot of challenge at the light at 15th Avenue and 440 and 41. I don't know if there's any light at the end of the tunnel there with DOT. It certainly would help out getting some people over to the Twin Pairs that are coming out of Countryway in the morning. So I definitely see some benefits in trying to get it to connect all the way down through. The overall cost, I don't need to just kind of digest that a little bit more. That's it.
I think one of the things that wasn't represented in this presentation, but has been a constant idea, is trying to get a bike path, but a golf cart path all the way down to Champions Park, so that the people who visit Champions Park have an easy access to get into our downtown area and spend some of those dollars in our downtown area. I think if we were successful at Commissioner Martin's idea of getting the road to 15th, that certainly would help that quest of also carrying that golf cart, bike, walkable path, all the way down to Champions and make sure that we get connectivity all the way down to 30th. Are there any other thoughts on this before we go? Commissioner-elect Clark, again, I can't see your face. So if you're trying to get to us, click that little button. If you click the little three screens, I think you can raise your hand. Let us know that you're trying.
You hear me now?
We got you. Go ahead.
I'm in favor of anything that would be an economic development for downtown. I just think it's going to be this is going to be tabled for a lot of discussion. So I don't want to waste a lot of time here with you and everybody and asking a bunch of crazy questions. But I think it's a very tabled. I think it should be tabled, and I think everybody's on point with it. But it's all about the dollars, Mayor.
Excellent. Absolutely. Anybody else? I think the last item will probably be a longer conversation, kind of like the road. So if we don't have any other comments about that, questions about that, Dallas, we have anybody in the waiting room with their hand up to make a comment? Hearing none, let's go to the next item, which will probably spur a little bit more conversation. Keep this one in your back pocket. All right, Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last topic for discussion asked for by the commission was addressing public facilities. The most recent request from the commission came up during our February workshop related to master planning for a city hall municipal complex. Prior to that, in last July, we discussed a police station and whether the city would start its own police department. The takeaway from that was we renegotiated a 2-year extension with the sheriff's office. But it seems like a final comment on doing all of that was, hey, staff, in the next year, would you go see if there's some land available for a future police department? We might need that. And so we've done a little bit of that with this particular workshop presentation. Just to remind the commission that we are in August of 2020 and our agreement for law enforcement terminates in September of 2022. So we are now 25 months away from needing to be thinking about what we're going to do with our next step in law enforcement, and whether the commission is still interested in acquiring land for a future police department. Doesn't mean that'll be the next, that we would terminate our contract and go straight to our own police department. But at some point in the next 10 years, the city thinks it'll transition to its own municipal policing force. They might want to go ahead and secure land for that. With regards to City Hall, we just as a reminder, and one of your handouts is the presentation that we received in February of 2020 with Skinner, Vignola, McLean. They did a kind of a planning study to give the city an idea of what it thinks it needs moving forward. To identify that we're currently between the Annex, City Hall, the Little Red Schoolhouse, and a portion of our Public Works compound are using about 6,100 square feet for administrative functions. They suggested that there might be a lot of efficiencies in putting all of those bodies in one building, give the public a chance for one-stop shopping, so to speak, and that we would need moving out in, say, a 20 to 30-year time frame. We'd need maybe 12,000 square feet, 12 to 13,000 square feet of office space to do that. They also suggested that we would renovate our current City Hall facility, which is 3,100 square feet, so that we likely are looking at the addition of 9,000 square feet new for City Hall facilities if the commission wants to provide more space for us to grow into and eliminate staffing at the Annex building, Little Red Schoolhouse, and at the administrative areas of the Public Works compound. Estimated cost for that new construction is somewhere $275 to $300 a square foot. And so we estimate the cost for an additional 9,000 square foot of facility to be somewhere in the $2.5 to $3.5 million range. The consultant felt like we could do it on this campus. With the police station, we had a long presentation that's also in your backup. Just as a reminder, we believe that the annual operating costs for our own police department would be somewhere in the $1.6 million range. Our contract with ASO is for $1 million. If remind the commission that our level of service would be significantly higher. Instead of one officer in the area and 3 SROs, we would have 3 to 4 officers in the area at all times. But again, that's kind of a minimum level of service if you're going to have your own police department. And I think the commission's thinking at the time was we may not be quite ready for that level of service yet. Again, our contract terminates just 25 months from now. And if we are looking for land, staff, we believe we need somewhere around a 3/4 to an acre of land for a police station. And that we've identified 10 to 12 locations around town. We believe we can acquire that land for $100,000 to $300,000, just depending on location. And that in the future, if the commission decides to build a police station, again, we think we need that 3,000 to 4,000 square foot of of building, and that the building cost will be somewhere between $1 million and $1.4 million. And I may have touched on every other slide. This is just a conceptual rendering that was brought forth by our consultant, who suggested a 2-story building be constructed north of City Hall. And with the Twin Pairs going through, we would actually have frontage buildings facing north and facing south. So that was kind of their concept. This was just a schematic identifying that there was room on our current site to add additional 9,000 to 12,000 square foot worth of facility. And then on the police station, a need of 3,000 to 3,500 square feet for a new police department. Those are all the other incidentals that would be acquired at that point. Again, I think this is a slide from that slide presentation. I think at this point, it's more of a land need. Next slide, please. Land needs are looking more like this. This slide identifies 5 sites. In your backup material, Brian went through, he identified several more candidate sites. All of the prices ranging, not all of it's for sale, but he identified possible sites on the State Road 26 and State Road 45 corridor. I think with one exception, he found a site on Newberry Place as well. Next slide, and these are the potential funding sources. As you can see, there are a few that we are not able to use for police. Dallas has reminded us several times that assessments and impact fees cannot be used for law enforcement services, and so they're not available for this type of financing. Mr. Mayor, that concludes our thoughts on public facilities, City Hall complex, and police department. And if the commission has questions, we're available.
Thank you, Mr. New. I want to reiterate, we are 25 months away from the end of our contract with ASO. By every expert's best estimates, 18 months is a reasonable time frame for starting your own police department. They say 2 years is preferable. It's a long process. So this may seem like we're talking about this long before we need to, but we're actually right on schedule with this conversation. So this is not, a police department is not something that we can put together 3 months away from not having law enforcement. So we have to have this conversation. We have to have this long-term vision in order to make this a viable second option when it comes to what we do to provide law enforcement services to the citizens of Newberry. So I want to thank the staff, not just for the law enforcement work, but for all the presentations, every single presentation tonight, the ones they were able to get through quickly, and the more lengthy ones, they all have behind them a tremendous amount of work. So our last conversation about law enforcement was go out, let's see about the land. Let's try to do this piecemeal. Let's see what happens with elections and negotiations and all of that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of moving parts here. But this is the direction the commission gave to staff, was to start with the land acquisition. I know everybody's already had a chance to look through some of those options. Any thoughts? And we can break this up from City Hall and law enforcement. You can ask questions about both of them, however the commission wants to proceed. Anybody want to go first? Commissioner Norfleet, are you reaching for your unmute button, or are you just leaning forward?
Yeah, I'm reaching for it.
All right, go ahead.
On the law enforcement, with some of the recent events that's been going on, I see a lot of law enforcement kind of getting a bad rap and a lot of good officers getting out of the business. And, I think it would be a challenge for Newberry's police department. And I think that needs to be taken in consideration, which we've talked about that before. And I still feel that way. And that's it.
You cut out there at the end. Was that the end of your comment, Commissioner Fleet?
Yeah, that was it.
And I couldn't echo that comment, that sentiment more. I think there's a lot of challenges for us starting a police department right now. But if we want to do this, I don't know that we could go in halfway. I don't think we could go in and say, but we're trying to pay the lowest in the county. I think if we're going to do it, we have to do it right. We need to pay for professional law enforcement officers that will provide a high level of service to our residents. We need to be able to hold them accountable and ensure that they do that. I also would love to welcome them into the city of Newberry and show them that they can work with a government that loves what they do and appreciates what they do and supports them. Other thoughts?
Hey, Mr. Mayor, you there?
You got the floor, Mark. Go ahead.
I've just basically, just a caveat on that, I'll tell you, I know it's costing us money on the sheriff's, but I just think the cost, if we can't balance, we got a balanced budget this year coming up. We hope. Where is all this money gonna come from to start this thing? It ain't gonna be no 1 or 2 million. It's gonna be a way bunch more than that to get this thing off the ground. So I think we negotiate with that sheriff and get some, whether she's Sadie gets back in after election or we get a new sheriff. I just think there should be some hard negotiations to try to get the cost down so we don't start charging our citizens and taxing everything we do is adding to the tax base.
Yeah, and I hear what you're saying, Commissioner-elect, from my memory that our cost estimates are include the payments to pay for all the infrastructure. So absolutely, no one is saying we can start a police department for 1.5, 1.6 million. We're saying we can have an infrastructure payment inside that yearly that would cover those costs. So, but police departments, fire departments, all of these services have a way of costing one thing when you start them and then creeping up as the years go on. So I think absolutely we want to begin with some hard negotiations right now.
Yes, I'm with you. But anyway, that's just my thoughts for now.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to just take this public moment to say I think that those negotiations should start somewhere around August 19th. So
I'm with you.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Commissioner Martin? Were you?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Mike, do you recall any conversations having to do with some sort of a potential ASO substation out here that could service not only Newberry, but be a springboard for them covering High Springs and Archer a little bit better at all?
Mr. Mayor, we've had those conversations with the sheriff during negotiations. Generally, it's been, if you'll provide a space, we'd utilize it. In her mind, and I think she's correct, the benefit of having a substation in Newberry would be a pretty constant police presence around it, and therefore, a more visible police force. She's asked, though, that Newberry provide the facilities for that. We've offered a portion of the fire department if an officer needs to take a rest or needs to go in and have some desk-based computer space for to write a report or things like that. She's also indicated that pretty much nowadays, with their ability to connect wirelessly, that their patrol cars are pretty self-sufficient. But when we have those conversations, it's always around Newberry provide the space, building space. Right now, we're kind of limited on space, and so we would have to repurpose a building or construct something new. And I guess there's, it's a big investment to construct a substation. Maybe there's a partnership in the works where we can work with the sheriff's department maybe end up in a long-term agreement. If we provide land, she provides a building, or we provide land and we share a building.
Go ahead, Commissioner Martin.
Was there any consideration for the existing property surrounding the fire department?
Not for a substation. I mean, generally in our mind, there's not enough land around there to provide a building, parking, and the stormwater that would be required for a second building. So on that site, several of the candidate sites that we put in this package, one is directly across the street, to the north across the street, and then 3 of them are across State Road 45 to the east. You kind of have, your public safety all proximate to one another, but we don't have enough room on that campus to support a full-blown police station. Maybe a very small 1,000, 1,500 square foot building that could serve as a satellite would fit on that campus, but a full-blown police station will not.
Do you have another follow-up question?
How big of a building are we talking about?
3,500 square feet? 3,000?
For a full-blown police station, it's 3,500 square feet.
Do we need to? Never mind. That's not a discussion for them.
Okay. Commissioner Coleman?
Are we touching, our cities touching together now with the city of Alachua?
No, we touch High Springs. We don't yet touch the city of Alachua. And as you know, we went down that road with High Springs twice. High Springs declined the last time.
Right, but city of Alachua touches High Springs, correct?
Yeah, but I don't think that's how the rule works. I think we have to touch them, not leapfrog. Would that be a
I was looking at a tri-city agreement, something like that.
We have talked about a tri-city agreement. I have actually got pretty good feedback from High Springs and Alachua about that. My understanding, though, is that's also a Tallahassee decision because there's unincorporated areas in between that would have to be looped into it. There's some dispatch considerations there as well that offer some obstacles to it. I think that if the commission wants that, I think that our city manager has a fantastic relationship with both of those cities, and we could ask him to spend a little time pursuing that.
Actually, it might be worth, not spending a bunch of staff time, but maybe just seeing how the water feels. I know we got several months out, but at least see if that's another option.
Well, I've talked to elected officials in both of those cities who are very receptive to the idea. So but the devil's always in the details. So if the commission is interested in this at this point in time, I would need to pass it to Mike to start working out what those details actually look like. Because all of that interest in it could disappear quickly, depending on what those details are. But I think that Mike could sit down with the city managers from both of those and just have one meeting, and we would be able to know if this is something we can pursue or not. So, can I have a head nod? Is the commission interested in having Mike have that conversation just to find out?
Sure.
Okay. So Mike, sometime get with Ben and DeCourcy and see if y'all can have lunch. Commissioner Martin and then Commissioner Farnsworth.
I guess with regards to just the conversation tonight, I don't have a whole lot of appetite for pursuing any property at this point. We're still very rural. I still think that there's probably plenty of opportunity to acquire land as we get closer to maybe pulling the trigger on something like that. Considering the number of properties that we have around here, and we're not talking about a whole lot of land.
Commissioner Farnsworth.
Yeah, I wanted to say that one of the reasons that we got the deal we did with the Alachua County was because they were under the impression that we were going to be going with High Springs. Now we take that away from them, then they can do pretty much what they want to, and we'll be subjected to whatever their decision is, not really what we want.
To Commissioner Farnsworth's point, the BOCC has made it clear to me that they will not accept future extensions of the contract between Newberry and the sheriff's office. I'm not entirely clear on their ability to stop us doing that. She's an elected charter officer. But you know, it's in the interest of bridge building. It's certainly a bridge they're not interested in seeing us build. If we were still paying the MSTU, I think we're at 1.6 this year. Who knows where that will be? Is that right, Dallas? Was it 1.5 or 1 point? I mean, we're already in the realm of having your own police department if we were still in the MSTU. And that has been on a fairly upward trajectory. So the only way we got the contract that we have now is because we have creatively thought outside the box about offering other options to our residents that our residents were compelled with, and that brought the ASO to the table. So I'm not sure how much longer, you know, at this point, unless High Springs change their mind, it is ASO or Newberry Police Department. Those are really the two options that you guys have in front of you. And if we're not prepared to actually start a police department, then we're down to one option, and that's not a great negotiating stance to go into with. Commissioner Norfleet.
You know, one thing that I think would work pretty good with High Springs and Alachua is, you know, trying to hire officers to fill those extra needs. You'd be in competition with Springs Sheriff's Department, and that would be a pretty big challenge.
You know, we didn't present it here tonight, but we would be remiss in reminding the commission that you know, there's always the last option. Our residents have voiced that they're not really happy with this option of just not doing anything, not contracting with ASO, not building your own police department. You would still get the one police officer in this zone. And now with the governor's order, the SROs are the school board's responsibility and the county's responsibility. It's an unanswered question, whose percentage is higher in that relationship. Now that also has not been a very popular stance. That's the stance that the city of Gainesville is taking right now, that they're saying we're not in this relationship anymore. We're not going to contribute to the SROs. So just to make sure we're covering all the bases, you know, in terms of level of service, there's not a whole lot of difference in the level of service that we would see between that last option and what we have right now.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I think maybe I might have cut out and you didn't hear me, but I was referring to the Springs County Sheriff's Department.
Oh, the Springs counties. I thought you said High Springs. Yes. Okay. Yeah, we don't want to compete with those guys. Mr. Manager.
Just to point out,
You're muted. Ah, thank you. The right now, if we were a member of the MSTU, which is how the county pays for it, we would already be paying 1.7 million, which is more than it would cost us to run our own police department. And we would be making this decision 2 years from now. So if 2 years from now, if we want to stay with ASO, I would venture to guess that we're going to be in the $2 million range to have that relationship continue with ASO. Commissioner Coleman.
This is a big head nod from if Mike would get up with Alachua and High Springs. I really think that we need that third option coming up.
I agree. And Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, I just want to point out that, and I'll follow up with this with GSG. is my understanding that in order to pull off this Tri-City, that the legislature would have to create a district, and that the district would have its own governing board and its own budgets, and they would operate both police and fire. So what that would require the 3 city commissions to do is yield to some degree a level of control. You know, it would not be this commission that sets exactly the budget for the fire department any longer, or High Springs setting their budget for their police and fire department. It would be an independent board that is likely comprised of elected officials from all 3 communities. But in my experience in pitching these ideas, and I don't want to cast doom, nor do I want to predict, predict something. I think it should be explored with an open mind. But generally what I find is elected officials bail when it sounds like a good cooperative thing, but when they become aware that they lose the level of control, they could get outvoted. You know, if we want to run a conservative, cost-effective police department and someone else says, oh no, I want to really embellish and provide a higher level of service, they could outvote us. They'd be setting those rates and we would be obligated to participate. That generally hurts moving those types of programs forward.
Mark, are you trying to get in?
I was just going to say, man, listening to all this, I know I've got I'm actually drinking through a fire hose with all this stuff right now. But if we're going to spend the money and the sheriff ain't going to work with us, and this other thing is just such a big pill to swallow here with this Tri-County and new legend, we just create our own force. That ain't what I would want to do. I would hope that our county officials would come together and give us a big long-term contract, and we could settle the dust on this for a long time. If not, then we need to move forward with our own way of taking care of our people.
Well, I think you drank that water through that fire hose real quick, because you got to right where we got to after years of negotiations. And I want to just clarify, when I say that the county commissioners have communicated to me that they're very unhappy with Newberry's relationship with ASO, that, you know, our negotiations are with whoever the sheriff is. So if Sadie wins the election, we'll start negotiating with her. If Mr. Watson wins the election, we'll start negotiating with him. We have to maintain our focus on that negotiation, and whatever we negotiate, it's up to the sheriff to go back and explain that to the BOCC. That's the way that relationship will work. I want to be clear with the commission and the public that the BOCC, in their mind, the rest of the unincorporated Alachua County residents are subsidizing Newberry's law enforcement. That is not the way we see it at all, but we've had these arguments and conversations publicly many times, and I don't feel the need to reiterate those here tonight. But I just want to make sure that we negotiate with the sheriff, whatever that contract is, it's between us and the sheriff, and then the sheriff would have to go and explain that to the BOCC. Commissioner Martin?
I was just curious if we had any public comment on that. I wanted to touch on the city hall
Okay.
topic.
All right. Mark, were you trying to get back in as well before we go to public comment, if we have any?
No, I was not, Mr. Mayor. I'm just hitting these buttons.
Okay. Dallas, do we have anybody with their hand raised? Let's put the phone number up. And then we'll take public comment, and then we'll come back and see if there's any appetite to talk a little bit further on City Hall. So ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching the end of tonight's workshop. We've got a lot of information about a lot of long-term infrastructure plans and critical service needs. The conversation that is current is about the future of law enforcement in the city of Newberry, what it would cost to run our own department, perhaps acquiring land, and those kinds of things. If you'd like to call and make a comment on that, the phone number on your screen will get you into the meeting. Once you're in, you'll see a little hand symbol at the bottom of your screen. Simply click that hand symbol. That'll let us know that you want to address the commission. Dallas, do we have anyone with their hand up?
No, sir, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, let's go back to the commission. And I encourage you folks, if you want to call in, we'll have one more public comment before we close out tonight. I think we all have an understanding of law enforcement. And again, this is just for informational purposes. So let's focus on the City Hall conversation briefly before we try to wrap it up tonight. Commissioner Martin, did you have thoughts on City Hall?
I did, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to clarify the picture, the rendering of the City Hall. This one, is that looking
Here.
north? So this building is this frontage, right?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. I think it's in keeping with the character of downtown to not get too modern. I am in favor of trying to site everything on the existing site, so we're not incurring the expense of buying more property or anything like that. I think the idea of trying to get it central between First and Second is or rather Newberry and First is attractive to me. And we kind of sit up here, and I know as a body, our charge is really to kind of look forward. And I realize that sometimes to the general public, maybe these conversations seem like they try to get down into the weeds. But we have to be kind of looking out 5-10 years over the horizon on some of this stuff. And I think this is pointing us in the right direction of where we end up having to go. I just like how it's kind of potentially coming together. The funding, of course, is going to always be a challenge. And I think as long as we maintain the value of the city of Newberry and what we're paying in taxes, as long as we maintain the value of what we were built on, I think that the city body buy-in will be there, because I think we get into trouble when we start getting outside our lane. I think we get into trouble when we start to do projects that are unnecessary or bigger than what we need, and just try to take us off into a direction that's not all that palatable. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Martin. Other thoughts or comments about the City Hall concept? There's Commissioner Norfleet.
I just have a question. When the current City Hall was built, what was the population of the city at that time?
When the current City Hall was built, what was the population of the city? This City Hall was built in 1992. Give us 1 second. We may be able to pull that up. I'm going to bet that it was 3,146. That's my number.
I was going to say 47.
1885.
1,885. I was just a little off. 1,885. So in a little less than 30 years, we're up to over 6,500. I think it's because we have people building houses in this town.
Mr. Mayor, we just as a follow-up to that, we believe our projections are that in 20 years, our population will be 10,800. That's at a modest 2.5% growth rate. I'll remind you.
I can hardly hear you, Mike.
Hang on 1 second.
You unmute yourself?
Right into the record.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to say that in 1992, our population was 1,885. Today, it's 6,500. We project that in 20 years, our population will be 10,800, and that's at a modest growth rate of 2.5%. I'd remind the commission that for the last 5 years, our population has been growing on an average of 5% annually. We don't expect that'll continue for 20 consecutive years, but 2.5 may be conservative.
You have follow-up question to that, Commissioner Norfleet?
I did.
Commissioner Martin?
City manager, given the numbers that you just gave us, does the projections of citing everything here even anticipate any sort of increase in square footage that we currently have? If so, what is that?
And I want to follow up on what Commissioner Martin is, the point he's trying to make, because one of the things I've heard about when it comes to the school board is that by the time they build it, it will already be not enough to handle the capacity. So are we projecting that this build out would take the capacity of the future growth that will be coming this way?
Mr. Mayor, the facilities that we estimated we would need were on the 25 to 30 year lifespan to get us out at 12 and 15,000 square feet total. So the designer spoke of probably phasing the building, do an initial phase and have a planned future phase so that we didn't overbuild initially. But he felt like that we could handle 30 years worth of population growth in our community, staff associated with that population on this campus. If we hit that milestone and 30 years from now, and we're again bursting at the seams, I think the answer then becomes we probably aren't able to stay central rather than just move your whole city hall operation out of the downtown area. I think at that point, you realize you put as much in one campus as you can, and you say, okay, Public Works administration is going to go to a Public Works compound. At 30 years from now, they'll probably will have a rather large Public Works administrative area, and they'll have their own building somewhere close to City Hall, but it wouldn't be part of City Hall necessarily.
Okay, any follow-up questions from the commission? Remember, the point of tonight was that
We're not talking about taking it down.
no, we're not. We're just adding to. We're not taking anything down. We're not proposing taking anything down at the current building. The point of tonight was that we've had a lot of conversation over the past 2 or 3 years about our roads, City Hall, police. We have these long-term envisioning projects, and they're all big ticket items. So staff wanted to have one night where we could look at them all, set them all side by side, and kind of think about what we need to prioritize. Remember, at the very beginning of the night, we learned about different ways of funding and perhaps bundling projects together to put it in front of the voter, to have different options, or to just say we need to do both of these on parallel tracks. So no decisions are being made here tonight, obviously, but we all have something to go back and talk to different residents about. Sit at Country Kitchen, bring these things up. Let's start talking with the residents about the future of Newberry and what we need to do, what we need to be planning on now. It kind of feels to me like we're wrapping up the night. Do we have any more presentations, Mr. New?
No, sir. No, Mr. Mayor, we do not.
Okay, so one last opportunity for the commissioners. Certainly you can call up Mike or myself tomorrow and we can talk about all these things as much as you want. But we start to get a little brain dead this time of the evening.
Speak for yourself.
If I don't hear anything from the commission, Dallas, can you put our telephone number back up one more time?
Good night.
Good night, Mark. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to the end of a workshop where we've heard about economic development projects. We've heard about expansive road projects. We've talked about our future of our law enforcement, the future of our city hall. It's been a lot to mill over tonight. If you want to address the commission on one or more of those ideas, options, plans, all you need to do is dial the phone number that's on your screen right now. Once we get you into the meeting, on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little hand symbol. Click that hand symbol. That'll let us know that you want to address the commission. Again, we're at the end of the workshop, so any item that we've discussed tonight is up for grabs. You'll have 5 minutes to address the commission. And it's been about the 30-second delay we have for the YouTube. Dallas, do we have anybody with their hand raised?
No, sir.
Okay. Well, I'll give one last opportunity for the commission to ask any last questions, make any comments. And seeing none, thank you, gentlemen. We are adjourned.